Had a very exhaustive meeting with the leadership of the CIAC. They also invited members of the Connecticut General Assembly to be a part of that meeting as well. The one thing I would say is really appreciated the fact that they heeded the call of the Department of Public Health and the Lamont administration to put forth additional efforts as it deals with how best they're going to keep student athletes and anyone who's involved in student athletics in the state of Connecticut safe when it comes to high-risk sports. They did present us some additional mitigation efforts about an hour before the meeting, in which we were able to do a review and also talk about it thoroughly. Just for everyone's understanding who was a part of the meeting as part of the Lamont administration, myself, Paul Mounds, Chief of Staff for the Governor. As you see behind me, I have Commissioner Dr. Deidre Gifford, Department of Public Health, and also David Lehman, Commissioner David Lehman, Department of Economic and Community Development, who also has been leading the efforts as it deals with our sector rules, and they both serve as co-chairs of our rules committees that lead the sector rules efforts. We initially also had members of Department of Public Health and Dr. Gifford's staff, most notably Dr. Carter, who's the state epidemiologist. Overall, one of the main efforts that they wanted to put forward when it comes to high school football in the state of Connecticut was this thing that people are talking about, which is currently not proven, but it still needs to be studied further, and that's to put various masks under the lower part of the football face mask. That's where a lot of the questions from our administration, led by Dr. Gifford and her staff, was made. The main thing as it deals with high-risk sports is the transmission of droplets in terms of mitigating various spread of COVID-19. There's still a lot that we need to learn about COVID-19. Us as a state, we have been extremely proactive and been a leader across the nation and our country in terms of how we've mitigated the spread here. But as Dr. Carter particularly said on the call, is that we're not out of the woods. COVID-19 is still live and present in the state of Connecticut. It's something that we are fighting on a day-to-day basis. And we have also seen various elements of our numbers going up, particularly in those who are in the 10 to 25-year-old age group. With that said, we appreciate the effort. We appreciated the meeting. It was cordial. It was respectful. Glenn Lungarini, who's the executive director of the CIAC, should be commended in terms of how he approached the meeting. He was prepared. He was ready to answer questions. Him and his team particularly were there, ready to answer questions. We did this meeting both in person, and we had individuals participate over Zoom. The legislators who were a part of the call participated over Zoom. But as I said before, this was a meeting for the administration and for the CIAC. With that said, I would say in closing, then I'm going to pass it off to Commissioner Gifford to speak more about from the health perspective, and then also Commissioner Lehman, is that it's still an understanding of the administration that there should be looking at any and all options to be able to have interscholastic activities for students, because we understand what it means for them overall. We understand what it means for their health, their activity, their mental health, and that's an important aspect. But the key is we always have to do this safely. And that's been the main mantra of this administration. How can we do the activities that we have known as part of our normal life safely, as seen in all of the various guidance that has been put out since March? Football is a high-risk sport. If there's something that we all agreed upon in the room, was that what has been said, not only through whether it's the NCAA, the national governing body that the CIAC is a member of, is that football is a high-risk sport, and it will continue to be a high-risk sport. But the key is, what can we do to ensure that we have as much information to ensure that when activities are played or participated in the state of Connecticut, it's done safely. So with that, I will pass it off to Dr. Deidre Gifford, who's currently serving as the acting commissioner of the Department of Public Health. She is also the commissioner of the Department of Social Services. Commissioner.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. As Paul said, I will add my voice to his to say thank you to Mr. Longarini and members of the CIAC Board of Control and their sports medicine advisors. We did have a long and cordial and productive meeting to talk about sports in general, but in particular fall interscholastic football. And so we very much appreciated the constructive nature of their presentation and the thought that they put into the suggestions that they had to mitigate the risk of playing interscholastic full contact football. As Paul said, football in its the form that we know it in is a high-risk sport. There's pretty universal agreement about that, and there was agreement between us and CIAC on that point. And what they asked, or what they presented, was some new strategies that may reduce the risk of droplet spread and transmission of the virus. And we listened and appreciate that they had these suggestions. I will say that these, and they acknowledged, CIAC acknowledged that these strategies are not proven. They involve some alterations to the helmet, and we just don't know whether they will reduce the risk of transmission by a little, a lot, or not at all. So, you know, we continue to think that we will learn more about these and other strategies as time goes on. Where we are in Connecticut right now, we are seeing, as we've been sharing for the last few weeks, a number of outbreaks around the state, and in addition to that, a real shift from older adults to adolescents and young adults who are getting COVID. And so that combined with going into schools, going into colder weather, the onset of the influenza season, continues to lead the Department of Public Health to say that high-risk activities really should be avoided at this point in time. So we will continue to, evaluate these strategies as they become available. I think the idea of pushing high-risk sports off until we have better data about whether these strategies will work is a good idea, and we would encourage the CIAC to continue to consider a later season for fall football.
So, Commissioner, your recommendation would be either canceling or moving it to after the first of the year at some point, because you still need some data on new suggestions like full face masks and such.
Right, we want to take a look at what they've proposed from what we saw this morning and what they shared with us and their experts shared with us. There's really not a lot known about whether those strategies would reduce the risk from high to moderate or low, and we continue to recommend that high-risk sports not be played in the fall season.
Commissioner, do you have any indication from a timing standpoint how long it would take to evaluate what they presented today?
Well, I think the fact of the matter is that there are no studies of these new types of coverings. We heard this morning that even the manufacturers have not really studied their effectiveness. So I don't think that it would be in the very near term that we would be able to have an assessment of their effectiveness, and that's why, you know, we think that continuing to talk about moving the season to a later point in time when there would be the availability of some of that information might be a smart idea.
And perhaps a vaccine or other...
Things change every week in this pandemic, so we'll undoubtedly know a lot more.
What do you say to the fact a lot of parents say to us, but look at other states, only Vermont and Connecticut, they're the only two states with no plan to play 11-on-11 tackle football, yet we have still very good metrics here, even though there have been cases throughout the state, individual cases. What do you say in response to that?
Yeah, it's actually not the case that we're the only two states. There are a number of other states, including, notably, our surrounding states, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, that have put football off until the spring. That's right. And that was one of the recommendations that we put forward earlier in August. Did you want to add to that?
Correct.
Yeah.
August 13th.
Yeah,
yes.
I'll add to that. I think there's this misnomer that the state of Connecticut and the Department of Public Health canceled football. These decisions are relied upon the CIAC, first and foremost. And as Commissioner Gifford has just stated, it's important for us, as we look at this virus, have a better understanding of it, especially when it comes to our adolescents and the activities that they participate in, to just look around the states around us. Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New York made a call. Some made them calls earlier than others. Massachusetts made their call in August. New York just made their call this week. Rhode Island made theirs last week. To say we're not going to cancel a season for the children. They need activity, but safe activity. We're going to look to see if we can do it in the spring. And like I said, I'm someone who I empathize with these kids. I was one of them. I played football, both at the Loomis Chaffee School and then at Trinity College. I know what it feels like to have disruption in your senior year. I had it when I got injured, and I had to change positions. I know what it means to be around your camaraderie of your teammates and know what it feels like to be close with them. I had that at Trinity College, in the championships that we were a part of. Football means so much to me. It defines who I am. Like I said, you go in my office, my football helmet's there from college. I'm a proud Bantam, but I'm proud of the lessons and the learnings that I received from people like Coach Jeff Devaney and people like Adrian Stewart at Loomis Chaffee. The reason why I'm able to stand here as the Chief of Staff for the Governor of Connecticut is because of who I became as a football player. I think this is a great time for us to understand the importance of athletics and the importance of activities in these children's life. And I think it's important for us as adults to figure out how we can make modifications to allow them to be able to participate in these activities. I know that there's a lot of skewering on DPH as it deals with 7-on-7 football and these options. Those are options that were talked about with CIAC and things that's going on across the country. Those were an options to allow kids to have activity. This epidemic that we are living in is hurting all of us in some kind of way, physically, emotionally, personally. We have to have some sense of normalcy, but we got to have some sense of normalcy understanding the time that we're living in. People are getting sick. People are unfortunately dying. I want these kids to have normal activities and normal lives. Know why? Because I was one of them. And I know what it's done for me as a person.
Dr. Gifford, it sounded like Glenn Lungarini expects some sort of feedback from your office pretty imminently. Do you intend to provide that feedback? And if so, what form do you expect that to take?
Yeah, we will. We got their mitigation strategies this morning just before the meeting. So obviously we want our experts to have a look, and we will get them some feedback. I can't tell you exactly what form that will take at this moment in time, but we did discuss in detail the mitigation strategies, and we did agree both on the high-risk nature of the football and the unproven nature of the some of the strategies that they put forward. I do want to acknowledge, though, that CIAC did have a long list. It wasn't just the grills and the face shields, right? They had a long list of ways: sideline behavior, spacing, cleaning and disinfecting, locker rooms, and there's a very robust set of strategies around mitigating risk. I think the key one, though, has to do with how they would mitigate the risk of the droplet spread, and that's the one that we really want to take a closer look at.
And I'll just add as well, mitigating the risk of a high-risk sport with the intense contact of tackle football.
Dr. Gifford, I have one more question, not directly about football, but in recent days, COVID cases have maybe increased a little bit. Now the positivity rate is starting to increase a little bit. That has coincided with back to school, but do you think it's fair to say that back to school is causing some sort of increase in COVID in the state?
No, I don't think it's fair to say that. I will say that you're right. We have seen an uptick in cases in recent weeks. It's small, and we're putting more mitigation strategies in place. It was one of the factors we discussed with CIAC, and Dr. Carter did an excellent job of explaining that we're moving into a new phase here. This is not where we were in June and July. We've seen a shift, as I mentioned, to younger kids, and we are seeing an uptick in cases. We are doing more testing, right? We're doing lots of testing going back to college. So we'll see how that plays out in the days and weeks to come. But of course, it's of concern to the governor, to Paul, to myself, and we're watching it very closely.
But sorry, Paul. But so if it's not back to school, I mean, what is your theory for why it's now a couple days in a row that positivity rate is
Right, so our contact tracing really is revealing a variety of venues where we're seeing this type of spread. As I mentioned when we talked about the Danbury outbreak, and as we mentioned in our alert before Labor Day weekend, small social gatherings continue to be a common thread. Unfortunately, it's easy for all of us to think that when we're around someone who's a family member or a friend that we can't catch COVID from them. That's not true. So we have to keep the masks on and keep the social distance even when we're with people that we know. There has been a couple of outbreaks related to places of employment, to churches. So it hasn't, and of course the universities that we've been talking about.
The CIAC's football committee recommended a spring season. That recommendation was rejected. What, if any, reaction or if there was a position presented on the possibility of spring season from the CIAC recommendation?
I'll speak, and I'll also let Commissioner Lehman also jump in if he wants to as well. I understand the CIAC's in a tough spot. I'll be honest. Like, we talked about the spring season. They have to represent every single member and every single sport that's under their association's jurisdiction. So that means changing of schedules and modifications and the effects that it has. I think that they want to exhaust as many options as possible before they want to look to modify football to a different season. And I'll be honest, we're almost at the end of the rope. We're almost at the end in terms of the decision makings that they have to make. I think that's a big part about this meeting, is saying here's some various mitigation efforts they think they have. I think they're looking for a certain endorsement in a lot of ways from the Department of Public Health. And similar to how the CIAC has to represent their member associations, Commissioner Gifford has to represent the health of 3.3 million people in the state of Connecticut. So I think when it comes to a spring season, I think the CIAC over the next few days will probably provide more clarity on that. But I know as of right now, they want to exhaust all various options for the fall as possible.
And maybe Commissioner Levy, you could explain to us about youth sports, because that was an issue. Weren't youth sports subject to the order or one of the governor's orders or the limit on outdoor gatherings?
Sure. Well, first let me address the question on the spring, because there was considerable dialogue on that. And the CIAC really brought up 4 points. One, here we are in the fall, the numbers look good and have looked good in the state of Connecticut, so the fall is what they want to be discussing now. Secondly, there were concerns that if there was a February or March start to a shortened season, similar to what Massachusetts is doing, that there's a lot of uncertainty and that things could look worse later. I think we view that time is on our side, whether it's a therapeutic or a vaccine or more understanding of the virus, more testing, but they were concerned that the future could be more uncertain. Thirdly, they brought up the fields. If it's a very cold winter, the fields could be like tundra and frozen, and that could increase injuries to football players as they're getting tackled. And then the last point they brought up was the impact to other sports. Even if it is a quote-unquote wedge season, what does that mean for someone that also plays baseball or lacrosse? So those were the 4 points, but as Paul mentioned, we see a spring or a wedge season being done in other states, and it's not just the Northeast, it's happening in Maryland and Virginia, for example, as well, with their fall sports. Paul, to your question on youth sports, the reopened guidelines, and we put them out initially June 17th, and all sports have been able to be played in high-risk sports competition since July 6th. and that is still the case. You know, we've enabled some choice, and this choice has ultimately been up to the CIAC in terms of go versus no go. And there are youth hockey leagues, youth football leagues, that is happening around the state of Connecticut, and certain parents are opting to send their children or have them participate or not. And that is still the case to this day. We're obviously closely tracking and monitoring it, but Commissioner Gifford mentioned this a lot in our meeting, as did Dr. Carter. You know, we're approaching we are starting schools right now, and it's critically important to us that we make sure our kids remain in school and that everything that's being done now as we get to colder weather and more indoor activities is done safely. So the recommendations that came out, and it was a recommendation, were that high-risk sports where there could be more COVID transmission, they not be played right now.
Just want to be kind of clear. Do you guys think it's realistic? Is there really a realistic possibility that there could be fall football, or is that pretty much off the table?
That's a decision for the CIAC and their members to make when it comes to high school football.
Is there a realistic possibility that DPH could change course and recommend that fall football be played?
I think what you heard today is that it will be hard for the Department of Public Health, looking out for the health of individuals all over Connecticut, to provide a broad recommendation that a high-risk sport, football, will be able to become a moderate risk sport based upon the recommendations that are provided.
Is Governor Lamont prepared to use his executive authority under his emergency declaration to put an end to this? Simply saying, no, you cannot play high school football in the fall, through an executive order?
I think the way that we've gone about our executive orders is try to do it in a very collaborative manner, not to be too heavy-handed, to allow science and health to guide our decisions. I think, as Commissioner Lehman has stated as well, we have also put out guidelines and recommendations and allowed the people of Connecticut to understanding what they're going in their own life and what decisions that they want to make. We're always prepared to do anything to protect the safety of the people of Connecticut. I don't think at this time we're prepared to put an outright ban to high school football in the state of Connecticut, but I think at this time we would put forth a recommendation that football is a high-risk sport in the state of Connecticut. Thanks, everybody.